Hey, what are you doing for Father's Day?
It's a total no-brainer this year. The Ticats home opener is actually on Father's Day, so we're all going.
The home opener is on Father's Day this season? Amazing! And now they have the live bands pregame in the new Stipley.
That's right. We're going there for the pregame, and we called our Ticats ticket rep and got great seats.
Consider it done. We'll see you there.
Make Father's Day a total party this year by taking Dad to the Ticats home opener. Get your tickets at ticats.ca/tickets or by calling 905-547-CATS.
From the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
Well, you've been emailing, DMing on social media. Now it's time to fulfill your needs. Following a long off season, the CFL This Week is back on the Ticats Audio Network. Come on in and listen to the podcast that offers unfiltered opinions from the CFL's top columnists, broadcasters, and insiders. Hey, this week, like no other, some heavy hitters from all parts of the country. Now, if you're seeking and appreciated solid journalism, this fellow has got you covered. From the Canadian Press and back for another season, Dan Roth, always appreciate your talents.
Thank you. Always appreciate being here.
Well, thank you so much. Here, hey, he also is pretty solid with his stats, and he gets his message across in very entertaining fashion on Sportsnet 960 in Calgary. Pat Steinberg, great to have you back, fella.
It's good to have it. Good to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Right on. And you know what? From good old Sweet Van City, he's always on point with his completely unbiased talk and conversation of the BC Lions. Yes, he is the voice of the Lions, host of the Grey Cup in Vancouver. We're looking forward to it in November. Now on 980 CKNW, the Moj, Bob Marjanovich. Always a pleasure.
Good day, gentlemen.
How's things in the West Coast, buddy?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff going on. I was just, speaking of Sportsnet, I was just tuning into our morning show, Halford and Bruff, and they had Lions president Dwayne Vanilla on talking about the Jonas Brothers coming to the Grey Cup. So, I mean, you got that. You got the excitement with the 50 Cent concert coming up, the kickoff concert prior to the game against Calgary. So there's a lot of buzz with the BC Lions and the Grey Cup in this city. And let's not even, Touchdown Pacific's another huge event, too. So a lot of stuff going on with the Leos.
We look forward to chatting about it. Let's get right to business, folks. Now, due to the length of the preseason, 2 preseason games, 3 weeks of training camp, I'm going to ask you, and I'll start with you, Dan, here. How many games do you think it will take for teams to kind of really assess where they are in terms of the coaching staff, positions, players? How long do you think that takes?
My mind, 4 to 6 games before the coaching staffs get settled, before they get an idea of what their identity of their team is and how young guys are going to have to adapt to the pro game and how newcomers are going to have to adapt to the respective offenses and defenses. So I figure a month and a half probably is going to take. And I think we're going to see a number of teams this year, that it will be a feeling out process, both East and West.
The gelling process is always different. Bob, what are your thoughts on the Lions?
Well, I think it's the situation you mentioned about the Lions. If you're talking about a more veteran team, a group that's been together probably maybe 3 or 4 games, but if you're talking about a unit that has a lot of new faces, is going through a rebuilding process, well, that could almost be a year-long type situation in terms of coaches just trying to find the right mix. I mean, look at Chris Jones and the Edmonton Elks the last couple of years, just churning players. So for me, I think it's just specific to each team's case.
And Pat, that may be the situation with the Stampeders. They're trying to find that, I guess, that culture or that identity. What about the Stampeders? How long do you think this will take for them to get up to speed?
Yeah, I mean they've had some pretty significant roster turnover, and they've added some significant new players, and we've seen a little bit more turnover with the red and white coming into this season than maybe we're used to around these parts, and a couple of injuries that have kind of set them off to that have kind of set them back a little bit as well. So I'm kind of the same opinion. Usually it takes about a third of a season. I feel like is kind of a good benchmark as to when a lot of these teams are maybe a little bit more up to speed. But when you're talking about a Montreal or a BC or a Winnipeg, despite the fact Winnipeg barely played their starters in the preseason, a lot of times it feels like with these types of groups that have been together for so long and there's a really good chemistry already, maybe it takes a little bit shorter and it's not quite as long a process. But I usually subscribe to that same 4 to 6 window, whether it's the Stampeders or most teams in this league.
You know, I hear coaches all season long, or at least all preseasons, saying the same sort of thing. There are players that I guess have been cut now on cut down day that are outstanding football players. But again, like, Dan, do we need to have a longer preseason?
No, I'm good with it being as long as it is. I think if you go to 3 exhibition games, then that's one too many. I think the NFL's looking at that right now. They play, 4, maybe 5? I mean, exhibition anything is basically for coaches to examine. But I like it the way it is. Keep it the way it is. I think training camp is a good length. I think 2 exhibition games is substantial, is enough. I wouldn't mess with it one way or the other, either reducing it or extending it.
Pat?
I'm all for that. I actually think that what they've done over the last, half decade now, and moving the season a little bit closer to the beginning of summer, and we're starting to see preseason games in late May, and like, that's important. I think the earlier we can start the season, the better. I think that where we are with the preseason, a couple of preseason games for each team is exactly what they need. I think it's a good, and yes, it does turn into a situation where maybe you do need a few regular season games to get up to speed, but I think that's going to be the case. If you had one more preseason game, I don't think it's going to exponentially change things, because coaches still aren't going to want to put in a ton of starters, and we're still going to be seeing a quarter, 2 quarters for starters most of the time anyway. So is one more game going to make that much more of a difference? So I think where we are is exactly where we need to be. And yeah, it takes a little bit of time to get up to speed, but I think that's kind of just part of the entire process.
Well, Bob, Pat kind of leads us that way in that sense. And you're the one guy that's calling games. Are the first couple of games essentially still preseason games?
Yes and no. No, in terms of your personnel, you are starting, the people that you're going to go with for the most part. Yes, and maybe, and I say this in terms of tackling, because tackling takes a while, right? And you can't practice tackling. It's not like the old days where you can run a gauntlet drill in practice or have all this heavy contact. In fact, the contact in practice these days is rather limited. People, they don't even wear pads like 4/5 of the time, right? So to me, I think that's probably one of the things that takes a little bit of time to come up to speed. So when I look at a lack of preseason games, for me, probably the biggest impact is tackling in the first 2, 3, 4 games. And by the way, anybody who wants another exhibition game, Bubs, and it seems like you're one of those people, you need therapy. Come in, seriously. From an announcer standpoint, are you kidding me? We got stuck doing a game in McMahon, and they got like a roster of like 90 guys. I mean, please, come on.
Bob, and the only reason why I say that is this: I feel like you're first of all, you're dealing with jobs, right? Jobs, people get paid, and these are the players. And the fact that decision, and you can only drink so much, to have so many overnighters and drinking coffee and trying to decide on a team, especially on a team like maybe the Stampeders that are trying to put something together. It just feels like, wow, it's a real short time to actually come up with some real serious decisions.
Well, I mean, what you do have is you have practice time in which you run a lot of team drills. I know the Lions do. And in those, those team sessions, when your offense is going against your defense, that's the time that you've got to shine. Now, granted, it is different. And Julio Caravetta, my color analyst, our color analyst, always talks about this. He says, nothing duplicates game speed, right? And if you're a receiver running across the middle in practice, hey, I'm going to make that catch stretched out. Well, guess what? Somebody's waiting on the other end. Now, all of a sudden, you get the little alligator arm. So you find out about players in games, and unfortunately, if you only have 1 game or 2 games to do it, so be it, because you're not going to get that opportunity over 3 or 4 games.
Guys, we're talking about contact here and the fact that you're right. Practices, for the most part, it's not like it was 2 decades ago. players are not wearing full equipment. We're not seeing full contact in practice. And now the CFL is looking at rules. At least this has been a discussion. And from what I'm hearing, it's going to be a continued ongoing discussion about discussing the possibility of changing rules when it comes to the kickoffs and returns in order to improve player safety. Bob, right back at you. What are your thoughts about, and the NFL are doing the same thing too, and we're seeing it in minor league football, changing the kickoffs as we know it today. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, look at the collision in the Western semifinal last year between Peyton Logan of the Stampeders and Jack Hinsberger of the BC Lions. And I don't know if you guys have followed Jack's story, but I mean, he has gone through a physical hell. And he's just trying to regain use of his arm. I mean, he's on Instagram and he's talked about this journey, but I mean, it's a really, really scary situation in terms of what he's going through in the rehab process that he's going through just to have try to have a normal life, never mind playing football. Football's done. So when I look at kickoffs, I'd like to see something done that limits the violence of the collisions. You still like to see returns because they're an exciting part of the game, particularly in the Canadian game. I mean, the U.S. game, I don't even know why they have kickoffs. The ball just goes through the end zone 95% of the time, right? In the Canadian game, it's a little different given the size of the field. And, you like to see that game, but you also want to see some way in which they can temper the violent collisions.
Dan?
Yeah, I'll piggyback that too. I'll be one of those guys watching the NFL with its new kickoff formula this year and seeing whether or not it works, and B, if it enhances, if it results in more returns, and see what the player safety element is. I mean, I'm a traditionalist. I do believe in the value of the kickoff, especially in the Canadian game, like Bob said. But I'm also a big advocate of player safety. So if we can find a way to keep the kickoff and the excitement and that element of the game in Canadian football, I'm all for it. But if we can make it infinitely safer so that we don't have to go through the stories that Bob regaled us with, I'm all for that too. So I'll be watching to see what the NFL does. I'll be honest, I did not watch the XFL and see what it did with its kickoff, which is what I think the model the NFL is adopting or something thereof. But I'll be watching it and seeing if it applies up here. But mercifully, the field's longer up here, so when guys kick off, they're kicking off to the 5 or 10. So there is going to be a return 95% of the time. If we can make that safer, I'm all for that.
Well, Pat, I'm going to throw this out here, and I hate to sound insensitive because you're right. We have seen tremendous injuries during kickoffs. And, Bob, you brought it up. It is part of our game. It is part of the CFL. The return is, arguably, I mean, look at pinball and Gizmo, Williams. I could go on and on with the wonderful returners we've had in this game, and the fact that it is a play where people are standing up in the stadium and cheering because it always is so exciting. I'll also throw this angle out to you, Pat, in the sense that like an F1 driver or an IndyCar driver, a NASCAR driver, you hop into that car and know anything can happen. It's somewhere in the back of your mind. And then I've heard football players tell me this, that I know at some point I'm going to get hit. That's part of the game. Can you change the rules and still have it as part of the game in terms of the kickoff?
Well, I think what we're talking about, especially when it comes to the kick return game and with kick return specifically, is that we are talking about more so than on a punt return, and obviously more so than on your typical offense defense set. Like the velocity that we're talking about with these guys able to as they run down the field, and the type of collisions we're talking about are so violent at times, like what Bob just told us, and so they are the ones that I think there's some pretty good science north of the border that these are the ones that can be the most dangerous and the ones that can be the most career limiting. And so I think it's a worthy thing to look at, and I think that it's I honestly don't know the answer, because Bob said what the NFL did originally was essentially just eliminate kickoffs by moving it up a little bit, and every kick goes through the end zone. It's got to be a really windy day, or it's got to be by design for there to be a kickoff on the other side. Most of the time, it's touchback, goes right through the end zone. So I don't think you necessarily want to go there. The problem is I don't know what the answer is from there to try to dial back. Do you limit the amount of type of run up that some of the defenders get on the other side, the kickoff team? Is there something you can do to make it so there's actual evidence that it might decrease the violence level of some of these hits? I don't know what the actual answer is, though, and I fully am there with you that it's an exciting part of the game. And when you've got a Javon Leake or a Janarian Grant or whoever it might be who's winding up, and all of a sudden you see him start to turn that corner, you get out of your seat, and they're exciting plays. But I also think it's important that, we are talking about player safety and continue to do what it takes to make player safety a priority. This one's just a tough one. I don't know if there is an actual happy medium for the league to get where they want to go. It might have to be a little bit more cut and dried or black and white in a situation like this.
Well, I guess this is a stay tuned situation, because I'm sure the league is certainly examining and doing their facts, looking at their facts, and watching a lot of videotape and listening to players and what they certainly want. So let's see what happens with that situation, because it really is game altering if they do make changes based on the way we've watched the game and we've enjoyed the game for so many years. Dan, right off the top, which team in the CFL this year, they got to get off to a quick start? Like it's just imperative.
Well, I look in the West Division. I look at Edmonton. Edmonton to me is the team that, it's coming out today in a story. I think Chris Jones is on a hot seat. I really do. After 4-14 seasons, I think it's imperative that he get this team going, and he get this team going quickly. And the sense of urgency to me was heightened as soon as they signed McLeod Bethel Thompson. It showed me that there's a sense of, we got to get going. We have to win now. And the easy thing would have been to allow Trey Ford to continue to develop and say that he's our starter for the future. And I just get the impression Chris, who is a veteran of the pro football wars, he knows what the deal is. And I think he's got to get off to a really solid start to try and reverse the culture and trying to regain a winning ways and show that the Elks are going to be a contender in the West this year.
Bob, I not that I want to hear your answer, obviously, but with the BC Lions hosting this year, we've seen this so many times that even good teams, when they're hosting, they're under a lot of pressure. Are the Lions feeling that?
Well, if you talk to Rick Campbell, he says no. And I say that because Rick Campbell and the Lions, and it's interesting because the question was thrown to Dwayne Vanuz a few minutes ago on Sportsnet 650, are they under more pressure with the Grey Cup in Vancouver? And the answer is the same from everyone in the organization. Our ultimate goal every single season is the Grey Cup, right? It's not there's an added pressure because it's Vancouver. We want to be in the Grey Cup no matter what. So if you listen to anybody from the organization, they'll kind of downplay that fact. But you're right. The Grey Cup is in Vancouver. Do you want to be in it? Of course you do. Is there added pressure? Probably, but no one will admit it because they talk about the fact that, for the most part, they are committed to making it to the Grey Cup game every year. But as far as the teams that's in a hot seat, I agree with Dan. To me, it's the Edmonton Elks. And, you talk about bringing in McLeod Bethel Thompson. Here's another thing that comes into the mix, fellas. This is a team that's trying to be sold. As you know, Bubs, it's a lot easier to sell a Mercedes-Benz than it is a Pinto, right? So if your team is winning, right? If your team's winning, it's going to be a lot easier to sell that team and get people on board in terms of buying it. So that's another thing that I think comes into the mix as well.
Why did you have to go there?
You're lucky because I've got my I'm working on my backup system. I've actually got, if you give me time, I will go to my other computer, email it to this laptop over here, and I've got a photo of you in a Mercedes-Benz by Lake Ontario. So don't even get going on that.
Pat, who's under a lot of pressure?
You.
Apparently, you're under attack, Bubs. I'll second or third the Edmonton side. There are two that came to mind. The only other one that I'll throw out there is Sask. And I just, Saskatchewan has had two absolute nightmare finishes to seasons where they looked like they were going to be a playoff team, where they went on 7-game losing skids to completely sewer that. And, it spelled the end of Craig Dickinson's time as head coach, and Corey Mace is in, and they have not messed around this offseason. And when you're talking about A.J. Ouellette and Jamarcus Hardrick and Jameer Thurman all on the same day to get free agency going, and you've got Trevor Harris back for year 2 at quarterback, and a market that let's not mince words. We all know what a high pressure market Sask and Regina is, and yet at the same time, attendance has been dwindling over the last few years, and there's a palatable frustration in that market with how mediocre the team has been here over the last little bit. So I just, with all the changes they've made, with the pressure that's inherent with being the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and with the way the last 2 seasons have ended, I think a slow start is, I don't think it's going to cost jobs or anything like that, but I think it just ramps up the spotlight and the pressure that much more, and knowing what is the expectation year in, year out, and knowing there's been so much positive excitement around the team this winter, I think that Saskatchewan's under a lot of pressure to get off to a good start as well. I think in terms of jobs and changes and all that type of stuff, I'm completely with you, though, guys. It's definitely Edmonton.
Yeah, you make a great point, Pat, and that is, I don't think Corey Mace is going to go anywhere after 5 or 6 games. I mean, he's safe, but I think as an organization, right, this is a team that needs to start getting their fan base back, because the stories that you're hearing out of Saskatchewan is that they've alienated a lot of fans with pricing and with all everything that goes around the game. They've got to get those fans back on board. Maybe they've started thinking a little bit too big business, and they got to get back to being that community type feel that they have to the organization. So I think you're bang on with Saskatchewan. It's not necessarily Corey Mason, his coaching staff, that's under pressure. For me, it's the entire organization.
Well, I'll go. I think Jeremy O'Day has the security of a 3-year. He's got a 3-year deal, and I'll write today is I don't think he's under the gun this year, but if he wants an extension in 2 more years, there better be marked improvement, and it better be very quick.
Guys, I got to admit, I'm a little surprised here. And Dan, I know you cover the entire league, but I know you have an Eastern focus. We're talking about an Ottawa Red Blacks franchise. 4 wins last year, 4 wins the year before that, 3 wins the year before that. I think the last time that they were in the playoffs, they won the Grey Cup, which was nearly a decade ago.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think Sean Burke is under the gun in Ottawa. He's, 2-4-14 seasons. He's entering his 3rd year. They were a player in free agency with Drew Brown and Darius Pickett, among others. I would agree with that, but I think the guy who's really under the gun to start fast is Chris, and I think for the reasons Pat and Bob mentioned, I think Regina, that marketplace is very, very rabid, and they expect it. But Ottawa needs to come out with a strong season this year. Because of what happened the last 2 years, and that we've seen some attendance situation there erupt, come about the last year. And
they haven't won. How many home games have they won, Dan, in the last 3 years? Huh?
Bingo. And I mean, people will say that Bob Dice is only in his 2nd year, and he is, but his future is tied to Burke, and it's the same with O'Day. We talk about Corey Mace and all the superlatives that go with him. Ultimately, his future is tied to the GM who hired him, because if a new GM comes in, he's going to probably want his own guy. So, like it or not, the harsh reality of this business is the guy who hired you is the guy who has patience with you. The guy who comes in, there's no tie there. So, yeah, I think Burke is on. Well, the expectations are high there. The expectations are certainly high in Edmonton, and the expectations are always high in Saskatchewan.
Okay, guys, this is interesting here. Off the field, Chad Kelly suspended a minimum 9 games. We do know that, but the Argonauts have to move forward. It appears that Cameron Dukes, who we saw a little bit of last year, is he good enough? Dan, you've seen this team from close range at training camp. Is he the guy to guard the Argonauts to the playoffs?
I got two thoughts on this. One, my original thought is yes, and I'll expand it by this. If Cam Dukes relies on the people around him, he's got the same offensive line this year that allowed a league low 19 sacks last year and paved the way for AJ Ouellette to be a 1,000-yard rusher. So the group up front is solid. I mean, you've got the league's outstanding linemen on that unit as well. And then he's got a receiving core that is headlined by Tavares Daniels, who I think we will all agree is one of the best. You got DeMonte Coxey, who was a very good player last year. And you've got a series of Canadians that are very solid. If he uses the tools around him and doesn't try to do too much, I think there's enough building blocks in place on offense for them to be steady. And if they can sort of, limit the turnovers like they did last year and not hurt themselves, then I think they can be in games. Because I think their defense is going to be stronger, even with the offseason defections. I think their defense is going to be strong and will keep them in games. If he tries to reinvent the wheel and tries to play bombs away, then I think they're going to be in trouble.
Pat, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe Duke's first CFL action actually happened in Calgary, where Chad Kelly didn't come back for a half due to a mysterious injury, which we still don't know about. But regardless, he came in there. I think his first pass was intercepted, but then he settled right in, and you're like, you know what? This guy looks like he can play the game.
Yeah, and I think that of all the options that they had in Toronto outside of Kelly, I think that Dukes is the right guy. I've liked what I've seen for the most part in the preseason. I think he's been generally good. Now again, he's seen good preseason defenses on the other side, or the best preseason defenses that he was going to see in the games he played. And I thought he looked good. His decision making was strong. And I think of the options they had, he's the right guy. But Dan's bang on. I mean, I think that the most important thing is that you don't put everything on Duke's shoulders. You've got an offensive line that allowed 19 sacks last year. Like, they allowed just over a sack per game. They were that good, and that O-line is untouched. And I know that AJ's gone, but I don't sleep on Kadeem Carey behind that offensive line as having a good season. They've got weapons. They've got a defense that is going to be able, as Dan said, to keep them in games. The Argos are still a good football team here, and so if you are letting Dukes manage football games and put together a game plan that uses the impressive pieces around him, starting with that front five, I think that they're in good shape. So I do think he's the right guy to stem the tide. I don't think we're going to be talking about a guy who's making dynamic plays the same way Chad Kelly would be, but you don't necessarily need that for the Argos to win the amount of football games they'll need to win to be a playoff team. So I do think he's the right guy, but I also think you need to have the right kind of tempered expectations for him going into his first full year. And honestly, this is going to be the first time that we really get a chance to evaluate the guy for real, because a little bit of spot work last season and a couple of preseason quarters this year, there's still a jury that's out on Cam Dukes.
Bob, I think this is a situation where, for the Argonauts' benefit, the head coach, reigning head coach of the year, well, he was a quarterback as well, too. And this will really help the organization, will it not?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's going to get first-rate coaching. But my question, and this is probably better suited for Dan because he's closer to the situation than we are, I just want to know, is he going to have a running game? I mean, Kadeem Carey was in Calgary. He's a great, good running back. But losing A.J. Ouellette's a big hit, right? And as long as Cameron Dukes has a running game that can kind of keep him in manageable downs and distances and allow him to manage the game, he'll be all right. But if that running game falters, or if defenses say, hey, you know what, we're going to take the running game out of the equation on first down, we're going to have to let Cam Dukes beat us, not Kadeem Carey or Adebo Boye or whoever else they got back there. I think Dante McMahon's the other kid that they got in the roster right now. That's going to be interesting to see how defenses prepare against the Argos. If they take that running game away, and now all of a sudden you got 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9, down in distances, can Cam Dukes get the job done? So to me, the running game is a huge key for the Argos this year.
Dan, were you surprised? And I know the suspension kind of came down late compared to free agency. But at the end of the day, are you surprised that, I guess, still at this point, I don't see a veteran quarterback on that roster?
Well, I do. His name is Nick Arbuckle. And
That's right. That's right.
They brought Nick.
Right.
Nick has prior experience in Ryan Dinwiddie's offense, dating back to his days in Calgary, and also in 2021, McLeod Bethel and Arbuckle were the Argos quarterbacks 1 and 2 before the Argos traded Arbuckle to Edmonton and anointed MBT as their starter. So, but to me, and no disrespect to Nick, who's going to be a better quarterback than I would ever be, but there's a reason why Toronto was able to sign him in training camp, because he has not taken advantage of all the opportunities that he's had to be a starter in this league. Now, can Nick stem the tide for a little bit? Yeah, I think he can. But if they go to Nick, there's one of two reasons, and neither of them are good. So to me, Cam Dukes has to stay healthy. Cam Dukes has to, I hate using this cliche, but give what a defense take what a defense gives him. And to Bob's point, the best friend he could have is a running back who's averaging 5+ yards a carry, so that you have to respect that. Can Kadeem Carey be that guy? I guess so. We didn't really see a whole lot of him carrying the ball in training camp. And again, no disrespect to Kadeem, but whenever I was there and he was carrying the ball, I was not asking who is number 25. I was asking, where's Kadeem Carey? So I think this offense, to your point, the head coach is the reigning head coach of the year in the CFL. He's the offensive coordinator and the play caller. So if there's anybody who knows how to get everybody involved, I would like to think it's the former quarterback who's the head coach. But you know what? If they're averaging, and don't sleep on Daniel Adeboboye. And this guy last year, and it was only 40 carries, but he averaged 7 yards a carry. And that's stellar. The problem is if he's going to be your full-time running back, you're losing probably your best special teams cover guy. So, I think they're going to use a backfield by committee. And you've got, like you said, you got McMahon, you've got you got Adeboboye, you got Kadeem Carey. I think they're going to go, bullpen by committee and hope, that they can average 4.5 yards a carry and take some of the pressure off Dukes, who is also a very mobile quarterback as well.
I guess I'm glad you corrected me with the Arbuckle situation, but I always put him in the category of, remember James Franklin, the best backup quarterback to not get a starting job.
Yeah.
And then I felt like every time Arbuckle was a starter, he ended up back on the bench. So
I remember when he was in Calgary, we were all saying he was the next one, right?
Yeah. Well, I remember his first game. We called his first game, and that was where Bo Levi got hurt. And he came in, and I think he went 9 for 9 and led him in a comeback win. And I remember the game because Rich Stubler kept playing this soft zone, and Arbuckle just picked him apart. I'm like, he's a rookie quarterback. Come after him, make him a decision, force him into decisions. And Stubler that was Rich's philosophy, the bend but don't break type defense, right? Yeah. And he just let him kind of pick them apart all the way down to about the 10-15, and then they put the ball in the end zone. So, I remember Arbuckle's first game against the Lions, and I think that might have been under the Devon Claybrooks era, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong, but that was his very first time. And like I said, 9 for 9, and they came back in a crazy win against the Lions at McMahon.
But I think at this point, I just quickly, Bubs, I think we know what Nick is at this point in his CFL career, and that's why I think going with Dukes is the right play. I think Arbuckle gives him a little bit of a veteran cushion that if you need for 2 or 3 games to stem the tide, and exactly. But we're talking about a guy at this point who I think is a CFL game manager. I've always felt that there was something there with Nick, but it hasn't materialized when he's gotten the opportunities. I just think there's more potential for a more dynamic offense with Cameron Dukes getting the opportunity to start the year.
Now, we kind of rubbed on this about teams that need to get off to a quick start, but I'm going to kind of change the focus here and get a little tighter here. We're talking about the Rough Riders not making the playoffs last year, and we're talking about the Elks not making the playoffs last year. Pat, which team does get to the postseason when we start in October?
Of those two,
Yeah.
I think of those two teams that, and it all depends on if Trevor
maybe they
Harris
both
can
don't.
stay healthy. I mean, I if I'm going to choose one, I do lean Saskatchewan. I think that Corey Mace is in this position because he's earned it. I think that we're talking about a guy that has had this kind of rocket ship rise to being a head coach in the CFL because he commands respect from his players, but he relates to his players. You know, getting to know Corey pretty well when he was out here in Calgary. I mean, firsthand, the guy's a football savant, and I really appreciate just learning about the game from him. And they went out, they made some important additions, and they're going to have a better O-line with Hardrick joining them, and that's something that they made steps from one year to the next. I mean, I think the four of us could have picked up a sack or 2 years ago on that Sasko line. It got better last year, and this year you add a guy like Hardrick to that mix. I think they'll be better, but it still comes down to whether you add Jameer Thurman and AJ Willett, or it still comes down to whether or not Trevor Harris can stay healthy. And you know what could have been last year, I don't know. Had Trevor been able to play more than he ended up playing, I think he went down in week 6 or whatever it was. So if you've got a healthy Trevor Harris, I think that this is a Sask team that can be a playoff team. And honestly, they were a playoff team for a good chunk of last year until, again, they frittered it away with just a brutal losing skid at the end. So of the two, I'll go Sask. I'm a big believer in Corey Mace. I like their additions, and I've always been a decent enough believer in what Trevor Harris can do for a football team, even now as a veteran. So of Sask and Edmonton guys, I'll lean Saskatchewan.
Bob, you see these teams from close range. Who's making the postseason?
I'd go with Saskatchewan again, although I think Edmonton's going to be nipping at their heels. I think the West is going to be a lot tighter this year. I think Winnipeg and BC are going to regress a little bit. And the thing that concerns me about the Lions, and Julio Caraveto always talks about this, is they won 4 games last year where they turned the ball over more than the opposition. So 2 things for the Lions that they got to clean up: penalties and turnovers. If they continue to do what they did last year, I think they're dancing with the devil. When I look at the West, I think Saskatchewan's going to be better with Mace having a new team there, having Trevor Harris for a whole season. I think Edmonton's going to be better with McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Those wins are going to have to come at the expense of somebody. So for me, I think it's BC and Winnipeg that maybe take a step back. When I'm talking step back, I'm not talking 9-9. I'm talking about the fact that maybe they step back a win or 2, right? Maybe they go from 13 wins down to 11 wins or 12 wins. So I think that's when you break down the West. That's how I see it. Calgary, I think they're in tough, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, Pat could probably tell us a little bit more about them, but they've got a ways to go, I think, to get to a 3rd place finish in the West.
Dan, spin that wheel of fortune. Who's going in and who's going out?
Well, I'll beg to differ and say I think Edmonton gets in. And I say that because I like their 1-2 puncher quarterback. If McLeod Bethel gets hurt or struggles, I think you've got the dynamic Trey Ford to come in with a huge chip on his shoulder. And the guy showed last year what he's capable of. And I think, he's in the last year of his rookie deal. And I think any opportunity he gets, he's really gonna want to shine. And I for one, I really thought they would have been. I love McLeod Bethel, his 5 years here in Toronto, but to me, you want to look at the future. To me, Trey Ford is their future, and I like what they have. I like everything about the young man on and off the field, and I just think some of the moves they made. I really like them. I don't. If I were Edmonton, I really would hesitate to give up Jake Serezna. I know you're getting a potential all-star in Curly Gittins, but he's coming off injury, and Jake to me is back-to-back, 10 double-digit sacks from the D tackle. That's worth its weight in gold. But hey, you still got Geno Lewis out there. You've got Curly Gittins, if he's healthy, will be a game breaker. You've got Brown at running back. I like Edmonton. I like the fact that I think they're gonna have to start quick, and I think they will. I mean, you talk about where wins are going to come from. Toronto won 16 games last year, and there's no way they're nowhere near that this year. So there's seven or eight wins possibly to give there. And I think the Western teams at Toronto had mastery over last year. I think those games now are going to be a pick'em, and I think the West Division can pick up some wins there. And I'm in agreement with Bob. I love Dave Dickinson. I love him to death, but they made the playoffs last year with their first losing season since 2007, and I think they're in tough. I really think they're in tough. Saskatchewan's going to be improved, but if Trevor goes down, Shea Patterson is the backup there, and he's a CFL veteran, but I think there's a great unknown there. I like if something happens to McLeod Bethel, that they've got Trey Ford and a determined Trey Ford to come off the bench.
Just a side note to jump in on Trey Ford. I was talking to G. Roy Simon, the Elks assistant GM, former BC Lion, of course, and he said they chart every throw in practice in training camp, and he said Trey Ford has looked great. So for what it's worth, maybe it's a situation where Trey Ford maybe even sees some game time behind McLeod Bethel Thompson this year. But reports out of Edmonton, according to G-Roy, he has looked outstanding in training camp.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they don't package him up some way, shape, or form during every game, because I would.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add, guys, on the Stampeders is I think where they're going to be in tough the most, just having an eye on camp out here, is you lose Malik Henry for a second straight season. He's not even going to play a game this year. Their most game breaking offensive player. Like they're going to be in tough on offense, and a guy like Jake Mayer, I think he needs playmakers around him if there's going to be a field stretching conversation. And so I think on defense, the Stampeders team is in your top half once again. I think we're talking about play. You had DeMario Houston. You've got a great D line. You've got a great linebacking duo in Mike Alway and Cam Judge. But so on defense, I think they're fine. But that offense, I think, is going to take a good chunk of the season to get up to speed, and so that's why that's what might hold them back in this West Division conversation.
Would Reggie would that put the onus on Reggie Beggleton then?
It does. It puts a lot on Reggie. If Reggie can stay healthy a full season, and we've seen it before, then we're talking about a top five CFL receiver. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But and what I liked about Jake Mayer in the second half of last season is he started using Reggie a little bit more, especially once the shock of losing Malik Henry last year started to wear off. But in terms of your biggest kind of flash game breaker, it still was Malik if he was going to be healthy. And so it does take a significant weapon away from him.
Pat, I think people, especially the Ticat fans, are certainly appreciating the the Stampeders preview there. Obviously, Bo Levi Mitchell is, he's been all business. He really has been. I'll give him credit. And he's really downplaying, the trip back to Calgary. Is there any buzz out there about this?
I think as we move closer to Friday, there will be, because let's not forget, I mean, with who knows if there was even the game on the schedule, if Bo would have been healthy to play it last year with how last year went. But had Bo played all 18 games, he wouldn't have played in Calgary last year because that wasn't on the docket. So I think with the fact that Bo has had himself a pretty decent preseason and a pretty decent training camp, B, that we haven't seen him back here in other colors, I think there will be a little bit of a buzz, because I give Bo Levi Mitchell a lot of credit. He turned himself into kind of a household name, whether you were a big Stampeders fan or not. He turned himself into a big household name here in this city. So I think that's one of the more interesting angles leading into Friday's game is the fact that we are going to see Bo back at McMahon for the first time. So I think the buzz will start to pick up here in the next 2 or 3 days.
One of the most shocking things I've seen in the Canadian Football League happened before the season even started. I cannot remember a time where the announcement for the halftime headliner for the Grey Cup, which will be in Vancouver, as we've discussed, has been announced before the kickoff of the season. Like, it's a shock to me. I mean, you go back a couple of years ago, it was basically 2 weeks in Regina, I believe, where the Grey Cup Entertainment was named. And I think you'd have to go back as far as about 100 and change days where Shania Twain was named. That's as long as we have seen in recent time. So the Jonas Brothers get announced as the Grey Cup headliner, Bob. This is this Amar Doman? Is this the Canadian Football League? How did this happen? Because I think the momentum, we talk about building on momentum at the beginning of the season. The fact that this can get pushed by the league for the better part of 20 weeks, this is great news.
Yeah, and clearly it's a league game. It's not a Lions game, but the Lions do have plenty of input into it with the Grey Cup Festival Committee and such. It's interesting, on social media, and it's kind of mixed reaction to the Jonas Brothers being the halftime show. I think everyone's happy, as you mentioned, that it was announced this early, but I look at it from a different perspective in the sense that if you can get people to go to the Grey Cup game or get involved in the CFL that don't necessarily watch the CFL, if you're touching that demo with the Jonas Brothers, then why not, right? I mean, people are going to go to the game regardless. If you're a football fan, if you're a diehard, and you love the CFL, you're going to the Grey Cup game. You're not going to sit there and go, well, I'm going to go because of the Jonas Brothers, or I'm not going to go because of the Jonas Brothers. But if you're a Jonas Brothers fan who's not a CFL fan, now maybe you're saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm going to go to this game and just check it out, and I'll watch the game and enjoy the concert at halftime. So for me, I think it's an interesting move from that perspective in terms of the demo that they're trying to hit.
Dan?
Well, they obviously didn't make this decision with me in mind.
Well, Bubba was ecstatic about this. You should see his Twitter account yesterday.
Or did he have Jonas Brothers beaming from the Mercedes that you saw him in?
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to be back in about 2 seconds. You guys continue.
By the time I get off my rant on this, it'll be more than 2 seconds. I give the CFL and Amar Doman kudos for making the announcement when they did, because I think it just gives them an entire season to build on the Grey Cup and the halftime entertainment. And to me, that's a positive. And again, I'm not surprised with anything Mr. Doman does, because the man has pressed every possible positive button to make the BC Lions relevant in that market. And every time he does something, I just shake my head in amazement. And he's got the Midas touch. This is notwithstanding. Obviously, it's not my genre of music, but they're not appealing to me. But to Bob's point, I think what it might do is it might get a younger person who's very, very Jonas Brothers centric. I might maybe bring them to the game, although you better be prepared to pay $150 for your ticket. But and you better get that ticket soon, because it sounds like they're selling out fast. But no, kudos to all the parties involved for getting this done earlier, because to your point, the longer it drags on, the more of a negative it becomes. And this way, it's a positive, and it's something that we can talk about and something people can talk about throughout the entire year. And good on them.
Pat, come on, you admit it. You had to have been stunned that the announcement came down yesterday.
Yeah, I even said to myself when I was like, well, first of all, that's a big name. We all, whether we're buying records or not, whether we're downloading records or not, still a big name. We all know the Jonas Brothers, Snail List acts. So you're like, okay, that's good. That's a good look for the CFL. And the fact they did it before the season even started, the first thing I said is, geez, that is early, and good on them, because it just helps with more of the push, and it gives them something to be talking about all year long. It gives them something to have going into halftime and into commercial breaks as they pump up the Grey Cup, and it's good to help push tickets, and then you're able to start advertising early that the Grey Cup in Vancouver's already sold out, which is good for the league. So just from a perception standpoint, I think it's important. So I had no problem with it. I was like, hey, that's a big act. Good on them. I loved Green Day last year. I know they kind of had to scramble 2 years ago, Bubs, with the one you're talking about in Regina. So as opposed to doing that, why not do it early like this? I'm all for it. So good on them.
They really did hit a home run just going back last year with Green Day, because to me that covered three different generations really of fans of Green Day. They were kind of that veteran rocker group, but I mean, To Dan's point, though, I don't know if you can have April wine and Chilliwack, and I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can do that anymore. The Guess Who, these guys are great, but
you mean the suburb casino crew that are all playing they're playing the River Rock, or they're playing
wow. Chilliwack. You actually dug deep on that one, Chilliwack.
I mean, hey, man, Fly at Night's a great track, but I don't know if I need to hear that at the Grey Cup. You know what I mean? But, it really is, though. But I do. I thought that was great that they hit a new generation. Maybe, Dan, and you can help me out here. I think it was the 100th Grey Cup where they had Gordon Lightfoot on one side and Justin Bieber on the other.
Yeah.
Maybe we got to get a kind of a coming together where we can just meld a couple of different generations on this one.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? If you're Canadian, who wouldn't be a Gordon Lightfoot fan? For us old guys, that would. But yeah, that was nice. But I was saying off air, my favorite Grey Cup halftime act was Lenny Kravitz, and I believe it was in Toronto in 2007. And I remember watching it and then realizing, like, oh crap, I got some work to do. So, I mean, I'm a classic rock junkie. So, but to the CFL's point, I mean, good on them for getting it done early. Good on them for getting a name that will appeal to the masses. And it's not my cup of tea, but they're not looking to attract me. I'm going to be there regardless. So, good on them either way.
Bob,
now, what did Bob have?
What? Bob, I have a question.
We'll save that till the end.
But Bob, seriously, does Amar Doman have some kind of connection with recording? Like, I mean, to get like an LL Cool J classic, all time hip hop guys, then 50 Cent, for your opener, that's outstanding. And I have every reason to believe that he has a lot to do with this Jonas Brothers thing. Like, he's really like he's connected. I guess it's fair to say.
Well, connected, but also he's got a lot of money, right? If you've got a lot of money, you can be connected to just about anybody you want. So money talks, right? So, but here's the thing: Amar has a vision. That's the really cool thing about Amar versus previous ownership, and that's what I love about Amar, is that even when you first meet him and you start talking about when I first met him, and he met with just about everybody. He'd have a lunch with me, he'd have lunch with staffers, whatever. But the thing that blows me away about Amar is he's got a vision. He has this vision for this team, where he wants it to be, how he wants to go about it. And it's really exciting to be part of an organization that has such a great vision. And not only does he have the vision, he has the resources to act on whatever plans his staff or his organization comes up with. He's got the resources to implement those plans. So it's fine to say, hey, we want to do this, and your president going, well, we can't do it. Amar's like, okay, green light, right? And that's the real cool thing about this Lions organization. And when I talk about organization, I'm talking about the front office staff that's completely rejuvenated under Amar compared to previous ownership, because now when they have any sort of idea or any sort of vision, it's acted upon, or it's listened to and then acted upon if it's a good plan. And guys, just take a look at the Lions' social media content. To me, I think their social media content, you can compare it with any organization in North America, right? I mean, I think they do a tremendous job, and it's just another way that this team is, acting on some of what Amar wants to do.
Yeah, I certainly get the impression with Amar, he doesn't look at, why I can't do it. I think he looks at it, how can I do it, and what do we have to do to make it happen? And you're right, that is a refreshing approach, very, very much so.
Well, I guess it's a lot of excitement for Vancouver and Vancouver sports fans, because what the Canucks did was just outstanding this season, and I guess to continue that momentum, just a mere couple of weeks later with the BC Lions, that bodes good news for sports fans in Vancouver and really across the country. Anyway, folks, you've been listening or at least watching to the CFL this week, and we'd certainly like to. I want to thank you for coming, Bob.
Bubba,
what's up?
I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, sir.
Is that possible to share? I'm going to try to share my screen right now. So I go share screen.
What, you're going to hammer on me again? Like what?
Oh man, I hope this works. Hold on.
What do you? People got to go. People have things to do.
All right.
What's up?
You go. Don't worry about it.
Bob, where can we find you if we want to contact you?
Oh, man. One of these days I'm going to learn technology. That's what I'm going to do. At The Real Moj on Twitter and on Instagram. So there you go. Oh, I think I've got it. There we go. Shit.
Hey, Pat, thanks for
There we go.
really
Can you see
appreciate-
that now?
What?
Look good.
Bubs, eh? Lake Ontario. That's Lake Ontario in the background, folks. There's Bubs in his Mercedes.
That's photoshopping.
No. That was taken in a promo that you had for some Mercedes dealership out there in Hamilton. Just saying.
Can we remove that, please? This is embarrassing.
Bubs, you look good, though. I like the suit and tie. That looks really sharp. It's a nice car, though.
Hey, you like the guy?
No.
I'm not selling either. So
Okay.
just so you know.
There you go.
Riding in style. You look good.
Yeah, well, guys, this is why, and girls and fans of the CFL, this is why you listen to this podcast, because of characters like this, Bob, the Moj. Thank you there, partner.
At The Real
Pat, where do we
Moj. Dan,
find
we'll
you?
be seeing you in Toronto this weekend. Looking forward to it.
I'll see you Sunday.
Yeah.
Pat, when we want to contact you, where can we find you, partner?
Just hit me on Twitter at fan960 Steinberg. Nice and easy.
We look forward to facing the Ticats and the Stamps on Friday night. Should be good football game. Dan Ralph, how can we contact you when we want to talk some CFL football?
On X, Dan Ralph CP.
I'm actually surprised you're on social media because you're so old school.
Oh, well, we all got to do what we all got to do, right?
This has been fabulous, guys. What a great kickoff to the season. And a reminder, this is just a mere sample of what's going down in the Ticats audio network as we offer CFL content nearly every single day. So please check us out on all the places where you find your podcasts and, of course, your social media content. For everyone here, enjoy week one, and we'll see you soon on the CFL This Week on the Ticats audio network.